Hello, I am the jailer's daughter, and I would like to start a new series today. And this is facts about men who have destroyed women's lives. I thought, what better place to start than with Henry VIII, who destroyed so many lives of so many women and so many men, in fact, during the course of his reign. So, he was born on the 28th of June in 1491. And he was very spoiled from the start. By the age of 3, he had been made the Constable of Dover Castle, Lord Warden of the Cinque Ports, Earl Marshal of England, Lord Lieutenant of Ireland, a Knight of the Bath, Duke of York, and Warden of the Scottish Marshes. Now, little Henry obviously didn't do anything to fulfill these roles, but they were given to Henry to stop those roles being given to other less desirable people within court. Henry was, of course, famous for having 6 wives. His longest marriage was to Catherine of Aragon, and that lasted for almost 24 years, although obviously the last few years were deeply unhappy, and they certainly had more than their fair share of tragedy. The shortest marriage was to Anne of Cleves, and Henry was rather cruel to her in referring to her as the Flanders mare. And their marriage only lasted 6 months when it was finally annulled. He had, of course, 2 of his wives executed, murdered. Catherine Howard was accused of adultery, and Anne Boleyn was accused of adultery, plotting against the life of the king, and also incest with her brother George. 5 men, including George Boleyn, were executed with little or no evidence. And it is generally agreed now that all of those charges were completely made up. Pope Leo X declared Henry as Defender of the Faith in 1521 for his defence of the 7 sacraments. However, he was excommunicated from the Catholic Church in 1538. In his younger days, Henry was handsome and very sporty and likeable. He did jousting, riding, hunting. After an accident in 1536, where he was thrown from his horse, some reports suggest that he was knocked unconscious. Other reports that he was without speaking for a number of hours, and other reports basically sort of suggest that he was dazed and little more. But whatever really happened, he seems to have been quite uncomfortable riding after that. Perhaps the accident frightened him. Perhaps he was physically uncomfortable on a horse after that. Perhaps he did some damage physically to himself and emotionally. Whatever the reason, following this accident, he did definitely stop riding as much, and this began to turn him into that later Henry that we recognise, that rather large gentleman that we recognise in the Holbein portrait. He also, there is a suggestion, started to become rather irascible and grumpy and very short-tempered after that accident. That could be a knock-on effect from not being able to do what he enjoyed doing, perhaps getting out and riding. Perhaps a knock on the head caused some physical damage to the brain. Whatever the reason, there does seem to be an exaggeration of his vicious temper after 1536. He kills his own wife shortly after that accident. But I think generally it's understood that Henry was never a happy-go-lucky gentleman, even before the accident. So if a change was made after the accident, it's possible that it maybe just exaggerated the already very short-tempered, very grumpy, very unpleasant side of his nature. Maybe just exaggerating those worst attributes that Henry had. He was always a very vain man. The gentlemen at court started to wear puffed out sleeves and padded out with various layers to make them look bigger, so that they could copy the king, so that he wasn't fat, he was fashionable. So they would basically copy the king by putting layers and padding out their tunics, their outer garments, so that they would resemble the king. He also introduced a beard tax, and this tax was on any gentleman who grew a beard, and that tax would depend upon the status of the beard wearer. So if they were in court and they were quite high up in court and they wore a beard, they would be expected to pay more tax than just your ordinary peasant who was emptying out the washing sheets and things like that. So Henry was certainly very cruel, as we've already mentioned. He did get rid of 2 of his wives, and he got rid of a lot of people that he claims to have loved. His friend Thomas More, his advisor Thomas Cromwell, he claims to have thought the world of these people. He really valued their opinion at one point, and then he didn't. And that love, that respect turned to hate very quickly, and it's the same with the women in his life. He made boiling a person alive a form of punishment, and it was carried out at least once with Richard Roos, who was said to have poisoned some members of the household. And it's an incredibly cruel form of punishment, arguably much worse than decapitation. So it certainly shows Henry's cruelty there, that he's willing to enact this terrible punishment on someone. Henry died on the 28th of January 1547. He was 55, which isn't particularly old at all. He did have a huge number of potential illnesses and conditions that historians have suggested that he might have everything from syphilis to gout to diabetes, and everything in between. So he could have had any number of conditions and illnesses that could have made his life very painful, very difficult. And yeah, he died. His waist was 54 inches at the time of his death, and he weighed 28 stone. That is a rather substantial size that Henry got to. I think it's fair to say that Henry ruined a lot of lives and made a lot of people deeply unhappy during his reign and before his reign. So, if you'd like more of this content, then please subscribe and like. Yeah, please do that. Thank you very much. Bye.